Okay, so we've been talking about, you've been reading about, you just read about, the church in the New World. And so the New World, we mean the Western Hemisphere, America, Canada, Mexico, and those nations. Now it's only new to Europeans. Native Americans, it's lived there a long time, it wasn't new to them. But we're talking about what happened when the church came across the pond. That's what we're looking at. Many of the original colonies were founded for religious liberty. But we will find here that they were founded for their religious liberty, not necessarily for the religious liberty of anybody else. And so the story of the colonization of the New World from a religious perspective, it's kind of sad, and it's not a whole lot better than the Europe that many of these people groups left. So we're asking the question, did we get religious liberty from the colonization of North America? So the objective here is to see the resultant policies created by Protestants fleeing religious persecution and evaluate the freedoms which resulted. There's going to be a whole lot of text up here. Please do not even attempt to write all of it down. The text will be, coming at you fast. So what I want from you in your notes today is the impressions that you get from the religious freedom that is granted or not by these various colonies. So when I put a colony up, I'm going to give you a lot of verbiage, and basically what I want you to say is a sentence or so about the kind of freedom in that colony. And then we're going to talk about each colony. You don't necessarily have to have notes on all of that. At the end, I will give you an opportunity to summarize, respond to the whole picture. So just a couple of statements from the lecture about the kind of freedoms that we're seeing, and at the end you get to summarize, okay? So here we go. Don't write all this down. I don't even know where to put my picture. For right now, I'll put it here. So Virginia was started by the Church of England. So started by separatists from the Church of England, by Puritans, but from people that were part of the Church of England to begin with. So the Church of England was still the official church of Virginia colony, right? If you didn't go to church one Sunday morning, you were a slave for a week. Meaning that can you picture this? You didn't go to church. The constable comes to your family and says, Mr. Hinton, I did not see you at church on Sunday. You are, for the next week, going to be working without pay in Mr. Oz's business or in the fields of Mr. Hands-on. And so you have nothing to say about it. That's the law. You didn't go to church for the next week. You work without pay to help somebody else. Okay? The second time that you don't go to church, you lose your liberty for a month. The third time you don't go to church, you are a slave for a year and a day. What? A year and a day, I don't know why. So that's the law of the land. Now, so the separatists left England because they couldn't worship the way they wanted to. And then they got to Virginia and they got the law. So did they grant religious freedom? No. They granted religious freedom to their form of worship. But if you didn't go to their kind of church, you quickly found yourself a slave. So if you were a Baptist or an Episcopalian or a Lutheran or a Reformed church person, and you found yourself living in Virginia and you went to your kind of church, you're a slave. So they gave themselves religious liberty, but they did not give religious liberty to anybody else. New York was originally New Amsterdam. Okay? New Amsterdam, the Dutch Reformed Church, was the official religion. They granted religious liberty to all Protestants. You could be a Protestant of any kind and be fine. But if you were a Catholic or a Jew, you were not allowed to vote. Okay? So you weren't a slave like you were in Virginia. You could still own your business and own your home, but you couldn't vote. So you were absolutely a second-class citizen. Your opinion did not matter in the government of New Amsterdam. Okay? So, granted religious liberty to all Protestants. Catholics and Jews could not vote. Massachusetts, this is the original one, right? The landing of the Mayflower and all of that. Started by the Puritan Church. Early in its history, the state banished several ministers for dissenting views, and they later established Rhode Island. So the original landing of Puritans in the New World, Massachusetts Bay Colony. You were fine as long as you agreed with them. But when there started to be matters of opinion, differences of opinion, they were kicked out. They were banished. And all of these ministers that got kicked out of Massachusetts formed their own colony and formed Rhode Island. So Rhode Island was established by rejects from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Okay. So do they have religious liberty? No. You are a Puritan, period. You aren't a Puritan, you don't live in Massachusetts. Okay? Church of England also started in Maryland. Now this was regular Church of England people, not separatists. Okay? This is the full-on Church of England coming to the New World in the colony of Maryland. You must tithe 10% of your income to the church. Okay? And then, unless you directed it elsewhere, it went to the official church. You may also elect to send it to the Catholic or Lutheran churches, but nowhere else. So they taxed you 10% of your income. And unless you told them, I want it to go to the Lutheran church or I want it to go to the Catholic church, then they took 10% of your income as a tax, the government, and gave it to the church, So if you were a Lutheran, you could say, please take my 10% tax and give it to the Lutheran church, and they would. Or if you were a Catholic, you could say, please take my 10% tax and give it to the Catholic church, and they would. But if you were something else, you were a Methodist or you were Reformed, then you would still get taxed your 10%. And it would go to the Church of England. And then if you wanted to give to your own church, it had to be beyond the 10% that the government took from you. So you would tithe twice if you were Reformed, or tithe twice if you were Methodist or something like that. So imagine what that would do for the churches that tried to come to Maryland and were not Lutheran, Catholic, or Church of England. It's very, very hard to do anything because your people are already tithing to a different church. And if you want to plant your kind of church in Maryland, you've got to find people who are willing to give you money beyond the 10% that they're already being taxed by their government to give to the church. So it's very hard for any other denomination to come in. Is that religious liberty? No, absolutely not religious liberty. They're not going to send you to prison. They're not going to make you a slave. You can vote, but your church is going to be poor, because we're already taking the tithe money and giving it to a different church. Okay? So it's not religious liberty. Delaware was not formed by any official religion. Okay? You didn't have to subscribe to any particular denomination, but you must acknowledge Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior to vote, to own land, or to serve in the government. I actually like that. I wish that were true. But, yeah. Still not religious liberty, not true.
Because no people are going to be acknowledging it just for benefits. It's not sincere.
Right. So in your paperwork to buy a house, you sign the mortgage, you sign the deed, you sign the whatever, and then you sign a statement that says, and I believe that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior. So that's a prerequisite for owning land, that's a prerequisite for voting, and that's a prerequisite for serving in the government. So certainly a lot more liberty than these other ones. You could be any kind of Jesus lover and be a full-blown citizen of the state of Delaware. But You could not be a a citizen of the state of Delaware if you were a Jew, or if you were an atheist, or if you were a theist, right, who believed in some abstract concept of God. So it still is exclusive to particular kinds of religions, but more liberty than others, okay? Connecticut, formed by the Congregational Church. And the Congregational Church, you will remember from other activities we've done, is very, very liberal, very liberal. The Congregational Church formed Connecticut and did not make any policies regarding religion. So they had true religious liberty. You could be anything and live in Connecticut. So it's good in that sense because everybody has equal freedoms in the state of Connecticut. But that attracted kind of, a motley crew of people to go live in Connecticut. New Hampshire started also by the Congregational Church, and no one denomination preferred over the other, but all members of government needed to belong to the Protestant religion. So similar to Delaware, you had to be some kind of Jesus lover, but you could not be a Catholic because you had to be Protestant. And that didn't apply to voting, and that didn't apply to property ownership, but it did apply to actual government service. So in order to serve in the government, you had to be a Protestant. That was the law when New Hampshire was formed. Anybody want to take a wild stab? When did that law change?
So one more time?
When did this New Hampshire law change? When do you think you no longer had to be a Protestant to serve in the state government of the state of New Hampshire? So,
Enlightenment or now?
The American level.
so we're talking what?
1800.
1871.
1947.
Oh, so close.
Like really recently. 1947, they finally took that out of the state laws. This was the law of the state for a long time. So the state of New Hampshire formed by a pretty liberal branch of Christianity, but one of the last states to let go of their religious requirements. So up until 1947, every member of the state assembly and every member of the state senate had to sign a statement of faith. They believed that Jesus Christ was God. So, and they weren't Catholics. So it's an interesting thing. Rhode Island, formed by the rejects of Massachusetts. So they had already suffered the back end of persecution in England, which made them leave to go to Massachusetts, and then they suffered the back end of persecution in Massachusetts again, which made them form Rhode Island. And so they said, no. You can believe whatever you want to and live in Rhode Island. Rhode Island had absolute religious liberty from its beginning. Georgia, no official state religion, but heavily Methodist population. It was actually colonized by Methodists, but they didn't make it the Methodist, they didn't create like the Methodist Church of Georgia as an official state religion. Predominantly Methodist though. All members of the legislature must be Protestants. So same thing as New Hampshire, but Georgia let go of it a lot sooner than New Hampshire. So again, religious liberty, yes, you can be a full-on citizen of the state of Georgia and be whatever faith you want, but if you're going to serve in the government, you can't be a Catholic or a Jew. North Carolina, formed by the old school Church of England, cannot be an elected representative nor conduct business unless you acknowledge the lordship of Jesus Christ and the infallibility of the Old and New Testaments. Wow, how does that play out? I would have loved to have seen that. I'll have 4 pounds of flour. That'll be 84 cents. And do you acknowledge the lordship of Jesus Christ and the infallibility of the Old and New Testaments? Yes, I do. Here's your flour. Here's your 84 cents. Like, how do you enforce that? That's just weird. But the law was you couldn't conduct business unless you acknowledge that Jesus Christ is God and the Bible is true. So that's a pretty strong law. I would love to see that try to play out. I think I'd just like to watch a transaction or two of that. Have somebody come up and say, oh, no, I'm not sure the Book of Esther should be there. Oh, never mind, don't use flour. Like, that's weird. I'd love to see that play out. But that was the law in North Carolina. Also, official Church of England in South Carolina. In order to vote, to own land, to conduct business, or serve in government, you must ascribe to the creedal documents of the state, which were non-denominational and Protestant. So this is a little bit easier. I could imagine this. You have the state's creed on the wall of your business, and you say, okay, here's your whatever, and thank you for your money, and by the way, you support that, right? Okay, good, thank you, and off they go. So you have to conduct business, to own land, or to vote, you have to subscribe to the creedal documents of the state. That can get kind of dangerous. Could you imagine if the state were then to all of a sudden drop some critical doctrine from its creedal document? And now in order to own land, vote, or conduct business, you have to say that you subscribe to that. Very quickly we can imagine it like the kingdom of Antichrist, right? In order to buy or sell, you have to say that Antichrist is God. That's not what this was, but it could have become that. You could have gone that way. So no true religious liberty here. As long as you're a Protestant, you're okay. Yeah, 2 more. There's 13, right? Yeah, so 2 more. Pennsylvania was formed by the Quakers. Before taking office, a legislator and judge must swear that they believe in one God, creator of heaven and earth, who reveals himself perfectly in the Old and New Testaments. So that's the oath of office. So it doesn't have to do with buying or selling land. It doesn't have to do with voting. It doesn't have to do with anything else. But if you're going to be a legislator or a judge, your oath of office says that God is creator of heaven and earth, and he has revealed himself perfectly in the Old and New Testaments. I would love to see that put back in place. Wouldn't that be cool? That would do good things for our country. But it is not true, perfect religious liberty. Even John Penn, or William Penn, who came up with the idea of Pennsylvania and creating that colony, he was all about religious liberty for the people, but he wanted to make sure that the government was in the hands of followers of Christ. New Jersey had no state church. You had to be a Protestant to vote. You had to be a Protestant to put money in the bank. And you had to be a Protestant to serve in government. So there's another funny thing I'd love to watch. I'd like to make a deposit, please. Here's my $4. Do you believe that Jesus Christ is God? Yes, I do. You're not a Catholic, are you? No, I'm not. Okay, I'll take the deposit. So you must be a Protestant to vote, to deposit money in the bank, or to serve in government. So that's the wide swath of the 13 colonies and where they stood on religion. It's a little bit of a different picture than what you probably heard in American history textbooks, right? Because American history class tells you people came to America for religious freedom, and they did. That's not an untrue statement. But then once they got here, they don't write this down. Once they got here, they didn't necessarily keep religious freedom, right? I'm being persecuted. Oh, I've got to run away. I'm going to go live over here. You better be like me if you're going to come be my neighbor, right? So they ran away from Europe for religious freedom, but they didn't carry religious freedom for everybody with them when they hopped across the pond. Here's a quote from 1772. It says, "If we look back into history for the character of present sects in Christianity, we shall find few that have not in their turns been persecutors and complainers of persecution." So both the people giving out the persecution and the people who say, I'm being persecuted, right? The primitive Christians thought persecution extremely wrong in the pagans, but practiced it on one another. The first Protestants of the Church of England blamed persecution on the Roman Church, but practiced it against the Puritans. These found it wrong in the bishops, but fell into the same practice themselves, both here and in New England. So this is a letter to a London newspaper, the 3rd of June, 1772, just a little bit before our nation declared its independence. So this is that same colonial period. What I want you to do is based on the little quick survey that I just gave you, and this quote, I would like you to respond to the information from today and the above quote in a well-written paragraph. What are we who believe we are the closest to the truth? Of course we do, or we wouldn't be here, right? If you thought somebody else was right, you wouldn't be whatever you are, right? We believe we're the closest to the truth. What are we supposed to do with others more distant from it? So I work at a Calvary Chapel church. I think Calvary Chapel is awesome. I would say that Calvary Chapel is as close to absolute pure doctrine as you can get, or I wouldn't be in a Calvary Chapel church. And that means that I think that other groups are a little bit further away from it. I think that the Methodists are a little bit further away from the Calvary Chapel. If I didn't think that, I'd be a Methodist, right? But what am I supposed to do with Methodists? If I think that I am right and they're a little bit wrong. So respond to this, write a paragraph, respond to this, and then I will look forward to reading them by great happiness.
Could we possibly write the paragraph on